Let's deal firstly with the employment visa under the General Employment Policy. Under the General Employment Policy, you need to be deemed a professional in order to secure an employment visa. And a professional means that you are a university degree holder with at least 2 years post-graduation working experience in a managerial or supervisory capacity. If you don't have a university degree, but you've got technical or vocational qualifications, then you can be deemed a professional on the basis that you've got 5 years post-qualification experience in a managerial or supervisory capacity. On the other hand, if you've got merely a high school education, the expectation is that you'll have at least 10 years post-secondary working experience in a managerial or supervisory capacity in order to qualify as a professional. Now, in some instances where the technical skills are specifically related to tech and coding, where the applicant hasn't gone through the formal sort of processes associated with a regular computer science education, if those candidates can demonstrate that they've got significant related experience, whilst not falling normally within the qualification criteria to be deemed a professional, it is possible on occasion to persuade the Immigration Department that a non-traditional applicant in those circumstances can go on to qualify as a professional and get an employment visa. So there are sometimes special circumstances the Immigration Department will take into account when you're dealing with particularly technical type talents, but in the main it's those three types of education and post-education working experience that the Immigration Department are looking to see as a starting premise in order to be deemed a professional so that you can qualify for this visa type. Now, assuming that you fall within those rubrics, then the test for approval when you make this application is that you need to demonstrate that the applicant possesses special skills, knowledge and experience of value to and not readily available in Hong Kong. Moreover, the employer needs to be justified in engaging the services of a foreign national applicant, or an employee in this instance I should say, and the compensation must be broadly commensurate with market rates. Now, until last week, the Immigration Department invariably were, I can't say relaxed, but they were prepared to take on board clearly the representations that employers were making as regards the ability to find the talent locally. At first blush, explanations that were offered were taken as being suitable by the Immigration Department. But because of the Audit Commission report last week, it appears now that the Immigration Department are going to hold applicants and their employers that are going to hold their feet to the fire and ensure that there is clear documented proof that labour market testing has been undertaken and that there clearly is no opportunity for a local person to uptake that work. Now, it may well be, given what you do and the way that you do it, it's clear nobody locally would be able to do that work. Previously, the Immigration Department would accept those representations based on sort of their experience of what was going on generally in these areas with jobs for people. But now it seems that we're going to have to be demonstrating that a full local recruitment exercise has been undertaken and that the results of that recruitment exercise are submitted along with the application paperwork for the General Employment Policy job offer visa. So for all practical purposes, if you've got a decent company, and by that your company is well established, and what that means is that it's at least 1 year old, that you've got a properly set up office, that you have a local workforce in addition to the foreign nationals that you're wishing to bring in, you've got a business history, you've got some turnover, you've got a sustainable business. If you've got all that in play, the Immigration Department will sort of move on these applications quite swiftly. If you don't have those things in play because you're a relatively newly established business, then the Immigration Department are going to be looking to that business to demonstrate that it can make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong, which in turn means that they're looking to see that there's proper funding, you've got sufficient funding to carry you to revenue, and if you haven't got sufficient funding to carry you to revenue, you've got a reasonable opportunity to arrange that funding that will carry you to revenue. So that's the General Employment Policy, employment visa based on a job offer. Is there any questions you'd like specifically to ask me about this visa type before I move on? Great stuff. Over to you, sir.
Talking about Stephen's last point about the 2 year requirement, I had the experience of interviewing a couple of people who didn't even meet those basic criteria, And I even went as far as speaking to Stephen about, would we be able to get this person a visa? I want to offer them a position, and it ended up that I couldn't. So it's certainly well worth looking into the general visa requirements, whether that's speaking to someone like Stephen or whether it's using his website, simply to avoid the disappointment on your side, not being able to recruit the person who you think's right for the job, and the disappointment on their side because they know they're suited for the job but they don't have the basic, 2-year experience. Thinking about some practicalities from our side, from the legal side of when you're recruiting people. There's a large number of documents that you need if you want to run your budding HR department, for want of a better word, efficiently and effectively. But there's a couple of key things that you're going to need. I would say before you're going to apply for a visa, the general visa that Stephen alluded to. An NDA, often called a confidentiality agreement, or sometimes a mutual NDA, stands for non-disclosure agreement, is something that allows you to protect confidential, sensitive business information, even when you're at the stage of negotiating with a potential employee, or discussing with them the role of the job. Remember that when you bring somebody in for an interview, even for an initial interview, you're often giving them a whole ton of information about your business, and then later on, as part of the visa application scheme, you're disclosing again, if you have written arguments and the sort of thing that Stephen prepares on a daily basis. There's a whole bunch of information in there about your business. Having NDAs generally in the commercial environment is very useful and protects your information, but it's certainly worth, depending on the role you're recruiting for, perhaps the more senior, the more important, but it's certainly worth considering getting an NDA. Of course, you're going to have to provide the person with a job offer letter, which will go along with the application as a minimum to show that you are offering this person a position. It allows you to clarify what you discussed in interview, not just often there's a discord between what happens in interview, in negotiate, and then later negotiations on salary, and then what the person actually expects from their final, their benefits package. So it's worth setting that out. I've put there alternatively a consultancy agreement. You can employ a consultant without a visa. I mean, this is aside from looking at employees. If, for example, and this is how I started with Dragonlaw, I was originally a consultant, an offshore consultant, based in a different jurisdiction. So thanks for clarifying that. I was working in a different jurisdiction and working in my capacity, working for myself as a consultant. And that's an alternative for certain roles, and perhaps going back to what Stephen said about tech people and tech people based in foreign jurisdictions, you may find that that's a suitable alternative.
Just to interject there, and it is a suitable alternative if they're working for on a consulting basis offshore, and then you decide you want to bring them onshore. If you can adduce evidence that they have been working for you offshore under the basis of a consulting agreement, and show that they've been receiving payments offshore on the basis of that consulting agreement, then when you convert their relationship with you into an employment relationship and then seek to bring them onshore and get them an employment visa, either give them a letter of employment or give them an employment contract, and you're able to demonstrate that you've got a prior history of working with these people via the consulting agreement.
So that might be in certain circumstances a good start. A consultancy agreement, while I'm on it, like an NDA, helps protect confidential information about your business from its misuse by someone who is effectively outside your business still, even though they're a consultant for you, and also ensures that your intellectual property is protected. If you ask a consultant to develop something for you and there's perhaps no consultancy agreement in place, or I'm saying, some guy that you know who's a friend, you ask them to develop something for you, and then there's a falling out, or they decide to go off to a competitor, if there's nothing in writing, then really who owns that intellectual property? And the consultant themselves might argue that they do. and then you've got a problem before you've barely got started. One thing I was going to raise about the tech, people who've got a background in technology, something that we've encountered when looking at visas for Hong Kong is that sometimes you guys who don't have formal qualifications, who have a kind of pure coding background, straight from school, obviously they can demonstrate relevant experience, but sometimes they're not allowed because they've signed an NDA to disclose who they've worked for. So in the case of, for example, one of our developers, he couldn't work in Hong Kong because he can't disclose who he's worked for in the past. He has no formal qualifications, but he's very good at his job. Well, it's a catch situation, I suppose. Back over to you, Stephen.
Okay, good.
Oh yes, and I suppose I should deal with the most important thing about employing someone, which is an employment contract. Now, obviously, your employment contract's going to deal with the main issues, what you're employing that person to do, how much you're going to pay them, what their benefits are, what kind of holiday leave they're going to have, how that contract can come to an end, which is quite important, of course, and then the issues I mentioned before, things like confidentiality, intellectual property, and strictly speaking, under the law, any IP you create as an employee belongs to the company, but nevertheless, it's certainly worth having that in the contract. Also, if you're, and I'm speaking to a room of entrepreneurs and people with startups and SMEs, the commitment to employ someone, and that commitment could of course include paying for their visa application, is quite a significant one. Their salary, their visa application, their benefits, the time spent training them, and you're putting big commitments in them. Of course, they're committing to you at the same time. But having a probationary period at the start, which allows you to part ways with them if it's not working out, is certainly something that I would recommend. A 3 month, it's up to you, but maybe a 3-month probationary period. And as I've mentioned there, your intellectual property and confidential information are all there. By having proper employment contracts in place, you also deal with future issues, or you avoid future disputes perhaps with the employee, and further down the line, when you're dealing with potential investors or looking at due diligence, you've got appropriate business contract, appropriate employment contracts there in place, and everyone's your business is happy and protected, and actually your employees understand the position that they're in and understand what their commitments are.